Didn't see you there. I was just reading this old comic book. Big surprise, huh? Hello, and welcome to Having a Drink with Mink. I'm your host, Jason Mink, and this evening, I'll be having this drink. Right off the bat, I'd like to say a big thank you to Dave and Derek. They're responsible for the new camera that we're shooting with right now. They donated this fantastic camera to the Old Guys Who Like Old Comics Network. You'll notice things are a little clearer, it sounds a little louder. Mink is a little closer than ever before. With this new camera, we'll be able to do all sorts of fantastic stuff. We're going to shoot some video at the upcoming con in February. We're going to go some adventures. We're going to go out and about. Come springtime, hit some flea markets, some comic book shows. We're going to be able to do a whole lot now that we have this fantastic new camera. Thank you once again, Dave and Derek. It means more than words can say. Cheers, my friends. Now you may have noticed I'm surrounded by spidery stuff. That's because today, on our first episode of the new year, I'm going to talk to you about something very near and dear to my heart, which is Marvel Tales. Marvel Tales is kind of a funny book. When I was growing up, Marvel Tales was ubiquitous. It was one of those comic books that just seemed to be everywhere. I didn't see a lot of westerns when I was a kid, or war comics, or horror comics, things like that. But for some reason, Spidey always seemed to be around. And while Amazing Spider-Man was having a great era at the time, some of my favorite Spider-Man stories of the Bronze Age occurred right then. It was Marvel Tales that I always gravitated to. If I had a quarter and I had a choice between Amazing Spider-Man or a Marvel Tales, well, 10 out of 10 times, 9 out of 10. It all depends on who did the cover. But, so what we're going to do right now is we're going to talk about Marvel Tales. I'm going to talk about why I love them so much. I'm going to give you a little bit of history, and we're going to walk through my personal collection of Marvel Tales, and we're going to see just what's what. Alright, let me get my notes here. It turns out that the first instance of the title Marvel Tales was a science and fantasy pulp magazine. It ran for 5 issues between May of '34 and the summer of 1935. The next instance of its use was when future Marvel Comics publisher Martin Goodman used the term Marvel Tales for his pulp sci-fi magazine. There were 3 variations of the name that he used at the time. We began with Marvel Science Stories, morphed into Marvel Tales, and then ended up finally as Marvel Stories. The title Marvel Tales was used for an Atlas Comics anthology starting in 1949, running through to the summer of 1957. In its 67 issues, works by legendary creators like Carl Burgos, Bill Everett, Russ Heath, Joe Maneely, and Basil Wolverton appeared. Alongside dozens of others. This title was edited by Stan Lee, who knew a good title when he saw one. Fast forward to the summer of 1964. Now editor-in-chief Stan Lee, with the encouragement of Marvel publisher Martin Goodman, dusted off the Marvel Tales moniker for that summer's annual, one of that summer's annuals anyway. It was decided that they would reprint a number of the most popular origin stories, and this is that book right here. It cost a quarter, which was pretty steep back then, but you got 72 big pages, and this featured the first reprinting of many of these stories. If you missed the bus the first time around, this was your opportunity to get caught up on the origin of Spider-Man. the next summer, Marvel Tales 2 appeared. Okay, it didn't look like this. It had a cover, actually. That's the thing. A lot of my Marvel Tales are beta readers. When I got back into comics in 2008, one of the things that I decided to focus on was getting a complete run of Marvel Tales. As a kid, like I said, they were always around. It seemed like it was a lot easier to complete a run of Marvel Tales than it would be Amazing Spider-Man. A heck of a lot cheaper, too. And I know that a couple pages are cut here and there, but they're usually dialogue. You know, it's usually not the most exciting stuff. I can live without it when it comes right down to it. It was just more of a thing to focus on as far as getting back into comic books goes. And personally, I love these great big anthologies. So like I said, this did have a cover when it first came out. This features the first appearance of the X-Men, as well as the first appearance of everybody's favorite, The Monster Among Us. Come on, guys, that movie's coming out in 2021. I'm just kidding you. I'm not really sure if there's a Monster Among Us reboot in our future, but what we do have is Avengers #1, which is pretty spiffy. Now, like I said previously, these were the first time that these stories had been reprinted. So these were treasuries, not in the large sense of the word, but more in like a collection of valuable things that you want to read again and again, you come back to. Very cool. So as far as it goes, it appeared as though there were just going to be those two. But then, surprise, surprise, Marvel Tales #3 came out. Let me consult my notes. I took copious notes for this, and here I am just winging it, talking to you off the top of my head. So what do we got here? Oh yeah. By 1966, the book was ready to go bi-monthly. The content shifted around a bit with other Marvel character stories swapped in and out to meet the book's healthy page count, and that is true. In its first 30-odd issues, Marvel Tales saw appearances from pretty much every Marvel hero, with the exception of Daredevil, who Marvel was busy reprinting in other places. So, let's take a look at some of these. Gotta love that. Right at the beginning, they had these jam covers where they would show you the original covers of the contents included, and we jump inexplicably from Spidey's origin in Amazing Fantasy 15, which was printed in Marvel Tales #1, which is a 1964 book, but they jump all the way to #5. I believe it's #5. 6! Yeah, can you believe it? So, Marvel Tales skipped the first 5 issues of Amazing Spider-Man. Now, there's a good chance that's because they were reprinted somewhere else at the time. I did some research, but let me tell you, it's a wide and deep field, that Spidey stuff, as far as it goes. But here's my little checklist, and this tells me Marvel Tales number, and then what issue of Amazing Spider-Man appeared in it, and then the little green check mark. Well, that tells me whether I own it or not. And I have a good number of these. I'll go through the list maybe at the end and talk about the ones that I don't have. But yeah, so like I said, #6. So it's a good jumping in point for sure. You know, it's just gives you the idea what Spidey is all about. I guess it's off the wall in that it doesn't take place in New York for the most part. It takes place in the Florida Everglades. But I thought that was really cool when I was a kid. Seeing Spidey make the web shoes, and I think he makes like a propeller thing to, you know, skim along the swamps. You love it. Love it. Great stuff. Marvel Tales was going to be a bi-monthly book at this point in time, and so every other month we would get one of these bad boys. Now, when I first read this story, I was a little kid. I read this in, I think it was a Lancer paperback reprint. and I thought it was the coolest thing in the world. I'd seen Daredevil. I wasn't all that familiar with him as a character, but seeing him in his yellow and red togs, and the way he was sort of a devil-may-care swashbuckler type character as opposed to the darkened character that I was coming to know in the late 1970s, early 1980s. I've always loved this cover. Ditko really knocks it out of the park on this one, and Ringmaster in the Circus of Crime. Love that guy. This is a cool cover because the eagle-eyed among you will notice that it's actually a composite. This particular Spidey right here was, come on, notes. From issue 14 of Amazing Spider-Man, and this was drawn by Steve Ditko. The Green Goblin right here, drawn by John Romita Sr., and finished art by John Nevere Porton, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. If not, I apologize, John. But this is a great book. I paid a little more than my usual beta-reader price for this because I just love the cover, and I wanted to have a real nice copy of it. You know, eventually I'd like to upgrade all of these. You know, having a mint run of Marvel Tales isn't outside of the realm of possibility. Here's another cool one, number 13. And as you can see, we've now gone to these full-size covers, and these more or less reprint Amazing Spider-Man as it appeared. Sometimes there'll be little modifications, like in the last book. Here's another one. Switch it up a little bit, but got to admit, that's a really eye-catching cover, and it's always really cool to see Ditko and Kirby appearing on the same cover. Never step on a scorpion. What's wrong with you? Come on, y'all. Here we go. Now, for the first time, the work of Marie Severin appears on a Marvel Tales. She is illustrating the seminal Spidey story. I forget the name of it right now. Forgive me, ducks thrown trash. But, what is it? If the sewer be my destiny, right? But I'm not really sure why they weren't able to use the original, but they called it Marie, and Marie did a pretty good job. I enjoy her work. It's always very cool to see. She really knocks it out of the park on this one. This is a great cover. Very, very cool. Very eye-catching. The yellows and the purples. Okay, there's another coverless cutie. And now, at this point in time, the books begin printing exclusively Spider-Man stories. The Fantastic Four's Human Torch, and who else was in there? Marvel Boy, and all those anthology stories, all the padding. It was gone. They decided to focus very specifically on Spidey from that point in time on, and I suppose that was a good idea because Spidey sold books, and at the time, these were the only two books that you would find Spidey in. You might find the occasional magazine or some sort of annual or something like that, but Amazing Spider-Man and Marvel Tales were where it was at, so they decided to focus on him. They doubled down, and what is it, 64 big pages of Spidey for a quarter. You can't go wrong. But with issue number 34, we went to a regular size comic. Just started printing single stories, and the price went to 20 cents. And I guess the comic continued to sell well because God knows they continued to crank them out. And some very striking covers. Gotta dig those boxes. I appreciate the attempt at the color correction here. Some kid with his magic marker. Maybe he was trying to make a couple extra bucks on the playground. I respect your entrepreneurial spirit, young man. I don't appreciate you coloring on my comic book, but what are you going to do? And what else do we have here? Some more These early Marvel Tales, very cool books. Anything with a 20-cent price tag is sure to get my attention, because that was just on the cusp of me collecting. And as a kid, when I would find a 20-center, I thought I'd unearth some sort of fantastic archaeological find. All right, let's pick up the pace a little bit here. We got a really cool Gil Kane cover. Gil Kane did some fantastic work, like I said, on Spider-Man, and these are a real treat. I loved Gil Kane's representations of Spidey as a kid. Couldn't get enough of them, and Gil really illustrated some critical issues of Spidey, some real standout moments in the character's history. This is a really cool book. You may recognize this particular illustration of Spidey. This appeared on a number of different merchandised items. I think I had this on a pen. And we have these right here. These two were two of my all-time favorite issues of Marvel Tales as a kid. I've had these comics in my collection off and on since I was maybe 7 or 8 years old, and contain some of the most exciting action, some of the most jaw-dropping moments in Spider-Man history. I just love the covers too, man. You know, it's just like I could stare at that all day. Spidey lost his powers, digging his fingers into the wall. Goblin laughs, taunts it as he falls desperately to the ground. Very cool stuff. And then here we have 99 and 100, and this reprints the Death of Gwen Stacy arc. Like I said, these Marvel Tales can be a bit choppy, but it's cool that at least for issue 100 they gave us such a memorable storyline, the wrap to that particular tale. And then, as a kid, this was one of those say it ain't so moments. Aunt May marrying Doc Ock, it couldn't be. It couldn't be, and yet it was. Almost. Almost. I love this particular storyline. Featured Doc Ock, Hammerhead, and some other fun elements that, you know, you just don't see that kind of stuff in comic books today. This is an iconic cover right here, and I think this was on a Trapper Keeper as a kid. A lot of these images, the real iconic ones, ended up being recycled from merchandise and things like that. As far as Marvel Tales went, it published Amazing Spider-Man more or less sequentially up until Marvel Tales number 136, and then with issue 137 they started all over again. And here we have Amazing Fantasy number 15, reprinted for, oh gosh, probably like the 15th or 16th time. But this book still commands a couple bucks, oddly enough, for whatever reason. Anytime it's the first time with Spidey, people seem interested, and I'm happy to have this particular book. And then also number 138. I got a coverless copy because, once again, you know, it's a little harder to find that because it's the issue 1, even though it's a reprint and we've, you know, had it a number of times. But what do you do? And so with these 80s reprints, Marvel Tales actually tackled Amazing Spider-Man from the beginning up until, gosh, I forget when it petered out, but what we did get were all the early issues that didn't appear in the initial run of Marvel Tales, which is why I continued to collect them past a certain point. I was just going to stop at issue 136 because that was sort of the end of that era, but to be able to get these stories inexpensively, granted, a few things have been changed. There are a few cultural references that have been updated, most specifically in issue 150, where Aunt May talks about wanting to get home and watch the Dukes of Hazzard I think it was originally an Ed Sullivan reference, but as a kid I got a kick out of that. I don't know, I was a teenager at that point in time, so I knew better. I'd read the originals, so I don't mind those little changes, because honestly, once again, I pick these up for $1 or less. That's my thing. It's part of the hunt. It's part of the thrill of the chase, is finding them, because they're beautiful books when it comes right down to it. People poo-poo the reprint. People don't have a lot to say positive about them, but me, I love them. We'll wrap it up right here with Amazing Spider-Man Annual #1. Marvel Tales 150 reprinted this story in its entirety, and it was great to get this. Now, earlier, I was reading this, and as a kid, that was where I first experienced the story, but apparently this was slightly edited. But to be able to see the artwork and these especially large pages was a thrill to me as a kid, and even though, granted, all the story might not be there, still very nifty. And hey, wouldn't it have been cool if Marvel Tales, if they'd all been issued in this size? I know, I'm talking crazy. That's what I do here at Having a Drink with Mink. Well, I feel as though I rattled on for an awfully long time. I thank you for bearing with me this evening. It's great to be back. If I rambled on a bit, I apologize. Haven't done one of these in a while. I'm doing them by myself. Well, hey, I'm not by myself, because you're with me, aren't you? Cheers, my friend. For the old guys who like Old Comics Network, I'm Jason Mink. If you enjoyed this video, please consider supporting us at the link below. Thank you.